at, we have started the recording. So we are recording the session, but we will turn off the recording before we start the questions, so that if people have questions that are of more personal nature, they don't have to worry that that's going to be on, recorded. If questions come up for you during the program, you can put them in the chat. And at the end of the program, I will make sure that Hildy has the questions and she can address anything that comes up. Okay, so I now would like to welcome Hildy Newmann.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you to the Aging and Community Committee for inviting me to present this to you this afternoon. I'm very excited to be here, especially on such a beautiful winter day in December. So I wanted to start off by addressing, what we all think of as the elephant in the room, the subject of death. And we don't really believe that death is going to happen to us. We think somehow we're going to be, the unique one that doesn't face it. But guess what? It will happen to us, whether we believe it or not. But we don't know when and we don't know how. So that's really scary and unpleasant to think about. But I'm here to give you a pep talk today about one aspect of preparing for your inevitable life's end, starting the process of downsizing your personal and household belongings. So why is it a pep talk? Well, a pep talk is a talk that's intended to make someone feel more courageous or enthusiastic. And a common attitude towards downsizing and decluttering, people are often, when they think about it, either apathetic, they're disinterested, they feel that it's distasteful, they feel dread, and that often leads to procrastination and inaction. And I think the only thing that's worse than people thinking about decluttering and organizing is when you put it in the context of preparing for your inevitable life's end. So I really applaud you for showing up today and for being willing to engage on this topic. So my goals for the presentation are to motivate and inspire you to take action, to give you some ideas on how to get started if you haven't, or to make further progress if you've already started on this process. Susan already talked about the logistics. We're going to be recording the session. We'll turn off the recording at the end for the Q&A. Please put your questions in the chat room as we go along. And I will also share that I do have a resource list that I'd be happy to send to you. And if you'd like a copy of the resource list, please at some point put your email address into the chat so I can have that. So let's frame the discussion. Why is this something that we want to think about right now? Well, there are a couple of things that come to mind. One is in the area of motivation. So COVID, of course, has been a wake-up call for many. We have to confront the reality that we're not immortal, and it's difficult to avoid the possibility that we could become seriously ill or even pass away unexpectedly and possibly sooner than we thought. So there's that aspect of it. The other aspect is the opportunity. Many people are stuck in their homes right now with extra time on their hands, and that's time that can be invested in this important activity. A little bit about the context. I know that the Aging and Community group is a group of people who are over 55. So I feel like a characteristic of the boomer generation is that we think we're going to live forever, but we won't, obviously. But also that we have so much stuff. We've experienced in our lifetimes just a flood of consumer goods, whether it's electronics, clothing, sporting goods, you name it. And also the size of our homes has increased, right? So it's so much bigger. And if we think about, kind of the way we live compared to previous generations, I think about the kitchen that I grew up in, how big it was, how much cabinet space we had, what was in those cabinets. And I compare that to my kitchen now, and it's just a dramatic difference in terms of just, an order of magnitude in terms of space and stuff. So in addition to all the stuff that we've collected, we may also have inherited our parents, and possibly our grandparents' belongings. So before you know it, it's just, it's accumulating, accumulating, accumulating. And I often say to my clients, you think about the things that you bring into your home on a weekly or monthly or yearly basis. And if you're not getting that stuff out at the same rate you're bringing it in, I don't care how big your living space is, before you know it, you're going to be out of room. So those are considerations. And then the last thing that in terms of framing the discussion is, whose responsibility is it to deal with all of this stuff? As I said to Susan and Rev Tefiret, I've heard two attitudes among people that I work with. One is, I don't want to leave this for my kids to have to deal with. And the other is, I'll let my kids deal with this. So my proposal is that it's the kind and caring and responsible thing to deal with your stuff yourself. It's a gift to your loved ones not to leave this task for them. And also, I feel that if your possessions are important to you, you'll want to make sure that they're dealt with appropriately. So, not to be, too confusing with this graphic, the reason I put this up is when I co-present this material, which I do sometimes with two colleagues, one of whom is an end-of-life doula or coach, the other is an estate planning attorney, we talk about the overlap and the intersection between these three domains of preparing for end of life. So the pink circle is planning for end of life in terms of the medical information you do and don't want to have. Your estate planning is, as we probably all know, how you want your dependents to be cared for and your assets to be distributed. But my focus today is going to be on the yellow circle, which is your stuff. But we also talk about the fact that your individual tasks in any of these three domains is going to be driven by a number of factors: what you've already done, the specifics of your personal situation, which may be your family configuration, your health situation, your resources, and also your values, your preferences, and your priorities. And along with that, there's also practical considerations. What can you accomplish right now? And especially now during COVID, there are limitations to what we can do. For example, my husband and I want to select grave plots. And the cemetery that we want to be buried in, where our family is buried, is in Brooklyn. And we don't really feel that right now we can travel down to Brooklyn and spend time in New York because of COVID. So that's a task that's an important task on our list, but it has to be put off for the time being because it's just not practical to do. So when I talk about your stuff, what do I mean by your stuff, which is obviously, a very technical term. So for purpose of our discussion today, your stuff really includes two categories. One is the documents that you create while you're planning for your end of life and estate planning. And then there's all your other stuff. So it's all the other stuff that we collect over our lives, including household belongings like kitchenware, electronics, books, artwork, all of that physical stuff. And then your personal belongings, right? Your clothing, jewelry, keepsakes, all of that. So the focus of my comments today are going to be talking about first considerations for storing your important end of life and estate planning documents, as well as approaches and strategies for streamlining your household and personal belongings. Okay, so first, talking about your documents and related information. So in the course of planning for your end of life and planning your estate, you've probably already or will be creating a number of legal documents. They could be documents associated with your medical wishes, and those would be things like healthcare proxy, HIPAA release, and maybe you have a formal advanced care directive like a MOLST, which stands for the Medical Orders for Life-Sustaining Treatments, and is a document that defines or clarifies what your wishes are for end-of-life care. And then in terms of planning your estate, you've probably created a will. You may also have trusts, powers of attorney, and those kinds of legal documents. And then in addition to those documents, there's a lot of other stuff that's important for your loved ones to have at the end or after your life's end. So those would include things like your insurance policies, your bank account information, contact information for important people like your healthcare providers, your attorney, your lawyer, your accountant, etc. There may also be, if you have a prepaid funeral plan, or if you have information about burial plots, those are the same kinds of or similar kinds of important documents or information. If you have a safe deposit box, it's important that someone knows where is the safe deposit box located, where is the key for the safe deposit box located, and that they also have access, that someone has signature access to be able to access the box if you're not available. And another big category is online passwords. So if you if you do your bill paying online, someone's got to be able to access your bank account. If you have social media accounts that you want to be shut down after you're gone, when we think about the number of passwords we have, that's a big topic in and of itself. But all of this information needs to be stored somewhere. And it's important that someone is able to find it when it's needed if you're unavailable. So there are a couple of options that you can take, and it depends on, I think, how complicated your situation is, and also your preference for paper versus digital. So the simplest of these is what's sometimes referred to as a death file or a death book. And this is basically all the documents stored in one clearly labeled folder or binder. So essentially, you take all those documents, you gather them all together, you put them in one place, and you clearly identify that that's what that file or book is. The next thing is what's referred to sometimes as a just-in-case memo. And this is something that you can think of as sort of like a roadmap or a treasure map to where all the important documents are stored. So if your situation is more complicated, you've got, let's say, you've got a home for which you've got documents, or maybe you have two homes, or maybe you have, you just have extensive files about important things. And so your things are well labeled, but they're kind of across a number of different files, file cabinets, et cetera. It may make more sense, rather than trying to combine all of that stuff into one file. It would be too big, it would be too cumbersome, to leave it all where it is and create, as I said, a just-in-case memo that basically says, if you're looking for the bank account information, look here. If you're looking for the insurance information, look here. If you're looking for the will, look here. And then the third option would be to put it in some sort of digital format. And you can either do that on your computer, or you can do it in a cloud-based repository. So one of these companies that provides this, and there may be others as well, the one that I'm familiar with is a company called everplans.com. And what they essentially are is, a cloud-based repository where you can upload all of your documents, and then you can access them, and you can give someone else access by designating that person, providing the password, et cetera. So there's no right way of doing this. It doesn't matter how you do it. What matters is that you do it. The way that you do it, you can choose whatever option makes sense for you. But the important thing is to make sure someone knows where to find this information and that they can access it. So I just want to show you an example. We worked with someone recently, and she gave me permission to share this because I just love this picture, to just give you a visual of, this is her just in case file. And it's very simple. It's a couple of manila folders. Each one says what's inside. And when she shared this picture with me after she created it, my immediately thought was that whoever she leaves, when they find this, their reaction will be, thank you for doing this, because she's given a gift to her family by making it easier for them. So I just wanted to share that. So And now I just want to say a few words about ethical wills. And I noticed after I blew this this cartoon up a little bit, but I think the gentleman standing by the side of a bed is a priest. So you can just ignore ignore that, because the focus here is on the content and not the particular setting. But a word about ethical wills. So you may be familiar already with the concept of an ethical will. An ethical will is basically a document that passes ethical values from one generation to the next. The original it's actually an ancient document from Jewish tradition. And the early ethical wills really came in the form of, they were oral, and basically men were enjoined to pass knowledge onto their sons in oral form. So that was how it was done originally. And then later it became more of a written communication in the form of a letter. So the content of an ethical will is similar to a memoir or an autobiography, in that it may include information about family history, personal life experience, professional career choices and accomplishments, but it's differentiated from a memoir or an autobiography by its intention to transmit love and learning to future generations. So those could be things like blessings and expressions of love for, pride in, and hopes and dreams for children and grandchildren, cultural and spiritual values, life lessons and wisdom, requests for forgiveness, rationale for philanthropic and personal financial decisions, requests for ways to be remembered after death, and also stories about particular objects that you've bequeathed to your heirs. So if you have written an ethical will, that is another document that would be important to store with your other important end of life papers. So your other stuff. So as I said earlier, we all collect lots of other stuff over the course of our lives. And if you think about everything you own, you know, it's kind of daunting when we actually think about how much stuff we own. And now if you think about your loved ones having to go through it all and dispose of it after you're gone, and if you feel overwhelmed by that, imagine how they'll feel when they're also, you know, under stressed, grieving your loss, under pressure. It's really it's a big burden. So I feel as though we can minimize this burden by taking responsibility, by proactively streamlining our personal and household belongings. And as I said earlier, if your possessions are important to you, you want to make sure that your stuff is dealt with appropriately. So another kind of thought I want to put into your mind is that your stuff is actually part of your legacy. Your belongings are part of the legacy that you'll leave behind. And I'd like to encourage you to consider taking a curating mindset. And what does it mean to curate something? So curating is the act or process of selecting, organizing, and caring for the items in a collection. So curating your stuff is the process of reviewing your belongings, selecting what's most important, and letting the rest of it go. So what I like about this idea is that I feel that it reframes the process. A lot of people feel like, oh, I have to decide what I have to get rid of. Right? I have to get rid of these things. And I feel like it reframes the process from something negative, what you have to get rid of, to something positive. What do I want to choose to keep? Right? So an example that I would give, and it's kind of a silly example, but it just comes to, it's just what comes to mind right now. Sometimes when I go to work with people, they say, oh, you're going to make me get rid of my whatever, my collection of 24 different pairs of black pants, for an easy example, right? So, and I always say, I'm not going to tell you to get rid of anything, because I don't know what's important to you. And what I think you should get, it doesn't matter what my opinion is, right? But what I would suggest is look at your 24 pairs of black pants, go through them and say, which of these black pants do I really love? Which are the ones that I wear? Which are, I love them because they're the right size, or they're the right length, or they're the right material, or whatever. But choose the ones that you like and let the other ones go. It's a much easier and more positive process than saying, oh, I've got to get rid of, 10 pairs of black pants. So the other thing that a curating mindset does is it it provides you this framework for streamlining your possessions by enabling you to select the best items and let the other ones go. And this helps you think about the heirlooms that you want to create and share. So by heirlooms, some of the things that might fall into this category would be family history. So you may have documents or items related to your family history, maybe letters, stories, photos. If you take those and collect them into some kind of a book form, you've created an heirloom for your family. So one of my clients, her mother was an artist, and for her mother's 90th birthday, she took, she had copies of all this artwork, and she created a book, which she then made copies for all of her mother's children and grandchildren. And so this now is a family heirloom that she's created. So now everybody can have that rather than just one person who has an individual piece of art. Another example would be family and children's photos and keepsakes. You can create memory books or slideshows to document those. You can take favorite family recipes and collect those and make them into a personal cookbook, which you can, which then becomes an heirloom. And again, you can make duplicate copies and give one to everyone in the family. You may also have special collections. So by special collections, I mean, you may have something like, something you're passionate about. Let's say you collect vinyl records, or you collect comic books, or you collect sports memorabilia, or maybe you collect sports cars. The thing is that collection, you need to think about what's going to happen to that collection when you're gone, because your loved ones may not know what to do with it. They may not appreciate it. They may not have the knowledge, probably won't have the knowledge that you have about the items and their history. So my suggestion is that you give that some thought and leave some instructions about where these things should go. Maybe there's a museum that would be interested, or a historical society, or some other special association. So again, this, I guess a different aspect of this is that this legacy mindset, it helps you prioritize and focus on tasks, because you can think about what tasks really can only be done by me or you, and what tasks can I really, could be left for someone else to do. For example, I mentioned already documenting family history, family stories. Another one would be labeling old photographs. So if you've got photographs that have people in them, it's very helpful for you to go through and put labels on the back of them, so that when your children or grandchildren are going through these photographs, they know who these people are. Otherwise, what good is it to have a photograph if you don't know who it's a photograph of? So in my own family, I'll say there are a couple of tasks that really I'm the only person who is going to do them. And the two tasks one task that I've accomplished and one that I'm working on, the one that I've accomplished is my father had a very interesting life story. He was sort of like a Zelig kind of character who just had just amazing life experiences. And he also, he was an amateur photographer, so he had a lot of photographs, and there were press clippings, there was some writing that he did, there was all this information. And we actually did an oral history interview with my father many, many years ago. And he also had an oral history done by Steven Spielberg's Shoah Foundation. So there was all this material, and everybody had kind of pieces of it, but nobody had his story in order, and there was conflicting, like, did he say this? So one of the projects that I did is I took all this stuff and I put it all in chronological order, and I made a book of his life history, and I made copies and I gave it to everybody, and now everybody's got it. And if I hadn't done that, quite honestly, nobody else would have done it. So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. If there's a project that you're going to do that only you would really have the interest in doing, do it. Another example that I'm in the middle of doing is I inherited a set of letters from my grandmother. I wasn't sure what they were at first, and then came to realize that they were in Yiddish. And I thought I didn't recognize what it was. I thought, and she had been a stenographer. So when I looked at it, I thought, is this her practicing stenography? But actually it was in Yiddish. I'm in the process of having those translated, and we'll put those into book form as well. So all by way of saying, if there are projects that you're the one who has an interest in that are going to be important for your family, that should be a priority. So the other thing I wanted to say is that you should tell your family that you're working on this project in terms of streamlining your stuff, and have them express if they have interest in particular items, so that you know. And what you can do is, if it's a large item like let's say a painting or something of that nature, you could put a sticker on the back of that. So when the household is being gone through, you find a sticker. And that's who that person goes to. You can document the disposition of small items in a letter or a memo. And if it's something that's very valuable, you might want to consider putting that in your will to avoid any disputes later on. So I want to say just a couple of words about keepsakes, right? Because yeah, keepsakes are one of those things. I mean, what's important to us may not necessarily be important to anybody else. Your loved ones may not value your things the same way you do. Additionally, they may have different lifestyles, right? So, for example, you're prized, I always think of this example, you're prized if you have this, china and crystal and silver. Well, your family, they may not entertain formally, so they don't need that stuff. They may live in smaller homes and not have the room to store it. In addition, I know just from my own, the next generation is part of the sharing, the sharing economy. They don't want a lot of stuff. They want as little stuff as possible. So, I feel as though if you explain the history behind certain items, that may help them to enable to appreciate these items. So this was your great grandmother's china. It came from wherever it came from. A story, I feel like, adds to the value. But I always tell people to try not to be disappointed or offended if their loved ones have different thoughts about their beloved belongings, because they're their keepsakes and not their children's keepsakes. So streamlining strategies, where to start, or when to start, excuse me. So sometimes there's a natural trigger in terms of when you should start this process. It could be at retirement. It could be because you're downsizing at home. It could be because a divorce has taken place. You can also wait for an arbitrary date, like I'm going to start this on my 65th birthday. But I would suggest that the best time to start is now. The process takes time, more time than you think it will. It's better to start when you're younger, in better health and with more energy. And it's better to work continuously and in smaller chunks than to leave it all for a big push at the end. It's less stressful. You'll make more thoughtful decisions, and I feel likely have fewer regrets. So another thought about where you should start. Well, your top priority is private stuff. And by private stuff, what I mean is anything that might be disturbing or hurtful or embarrassing for your loved ones to find if you're not there, to kind of help them put that into context. So one example is love letters that you may have from anybody, either who is not your current spouse or partner, or even if they are your current spouse or partner, they just may be private to you and you really don't want anybody else getting rid of them. Reading them. So you might want to think about dealing with those things, go through them, read them, savor them, and shred them. The other thing that would fall into this category would be journals. My mother kept many journals, and we were going through her things. We came across a box of journals, and my older sister said, "Oh yeah, I want to, we got to keep those." I'm like, "Oh no, those were Mom's. She used those for working out her personal, whatever." And I don't think she intended for anybody else to read them. So that's a difference of opinion that we had. I lost that one. She's got the journals, but I don't ever plan to read them. So I would say if you have journals with, that you've kept for your own, private, processing, that you don't want anyone else to see, you might want to think about disposing of them. And I would say, anything else that is of an intimate nature, you just want to think about that and think about, whether you want to dispose of those items now rather than leaving them for someone else to find. So what you do next is going to depend on your time frame. And really what I mean by that is whether or not you have a move planned in the near future. So, excuse me one moment. So, if you have a short deadline due to impending move, the good news is that's very motivating, right? Having a move deadline there's nothing more motivating than that, right? So what you want to do in that case is you want to start from your move date and work backward to make a plan to go through and downsize your belongings. You want to think about the configuration of the target space that you're moving to. Likely, your target space will be smaller than your present space. It may have fewer bedrooms. It may not have a separate dining room if you have one now. It may not have what I refer to as auxiliary storage. So you may not have a basement. You may not have an attic. You may not have a garage. You may not have a storage shed, for example. And then you may also have just less storage space. So you've got closets and cabinets, but you've got less space in those things. So my suggestion is that you tackle the downsizing project by moving from room to room. That seems to be the most straightforward and kind of least confusing way of doing things. You want to document your decisions as you go along in terms of keep, donate, recycle, etc. Don't document those decisions as you go along so that you don't have to make decisions twice. And I would suggest also that it's important to deal with the contents of those storage spaces, right? Because you may not have those storage spaces in your new home. So for example, if you're moving and to a space that doesn't have a garage, you need to think about what's going to happen to all this stuff that's in your existing garage. So, garages, attics, basements, they often have large and infrequently used items. That's why they're in those storage spaces. But because they're fewer, bigger things, they've got a big impact on space saving. So for example, if you make a decision to get rid of an old couch that's in your basement, think about that's one decision, and you think about how much space that takes up, and compare that to if I had to go through, let's say, 12 boxes of papers that take the same physical space, how long would it take you to go through that, right? So if you've got a short time frame, you want to deal with those big, bulky things earlier in the process, because that's going to give you the most savings, storage savings for your bang for your buck. So, then on the other side of that, you want to leave projects like going through photos and papers for later, because those involve many decisions and have a small impact on space savings. So the converse of this is if you have a long time frame. So if you're working over an extended period, you don't have an immediate deadline. So you need to find some other motivation to keep you working on this. I suggest if you have a long time frame that it makes sense to work by categories of items. So for example, you want to go through all of your books, right? You want to go through all of your kitchenware. You want to go through, all of your linens, regardless of where in your space they're stored. That way you're seeing kind of your universe of that thing, selecting what you want to keep and letting the rest go. You want to look for things that I refer to as quick hits or low-hanging fruit. This gives you quick results and gratification. An example of this would be things from phases of your life that are over. For example, the old college notebooks that you haven't looked at for 40 years. The work material from old jobs, equipment from sports you no longer play. All that is, I would say, is low-hanging fruit. You also want to, as I mentioned, work from few to big to many to small, and from less personal to more personal. And what that does is it kind of, it helps you build up your decision-making muscles, right? The more you do this, the easier it is to do, and the more kind of fun and motivating it is to do it. So again, if you have more time, this is when you want to tackle those big projects, such as culling and organizing and digitizing photos and culling and organizing papers. I do want to say that you don't need to ask permission to get rid of unwanted gifts from other people. You can let those go. You don't have to keep them forever just because someone gave them to you as a gift. And finally, just to encourage you to keep at it, The lack of deadline, as I said, there's no external pressure. So you need to keep chipping away at this project. And one way of doing that, of course, is, putting it on your schedule. So saying like, okay, I'm going to spend an hour every Saturday afternoon, or I'm going to spend, one Saturday morning a month, whatever it is. If you put it on your schedule and you devote the time and chip away at it, you can get a lot accomplished. And it's really amazing how much you can get done, in an hour, regularly scheduled, and make progress that way. So how do you get rid of your stuff? This is probably not news to anybody, but there's lots of different options. One thing I sometimes hear with clients who are moving or downsizing is like, oh, I'm just going to hire a dumpster and throw everything in the dumpster. And, honestly, I really don't like to hear that, because I don't like waste. And I feel like a lot of things get thrown away. And I feel like it's wasteful to throw away things that are usable. So you can hire a clean out company, but just be mindful, do a little bit of research. They're not all the same. I think probably some, just come with a truck and throw it all in the truck and drive it away. But there are other companies who are more mindful and who will, actually consign, sell some of your belongings if they can, or they'll donate to a worthy organization. What they can't donate, they'll try to recycle, and only as a last resort will they put something out on the curb. You can also, sell your items through consignment or auction, depending on their value. You can give items away to other people, but again, the opposite side of what I said earlier, you should be mindful that people may or may not appreciate being given your unwanted items, and the way to find out is just to ask them. So of course you can donate, you can recycle, and as a last resort, you can put things out in the trash. So because of our audience, I just want to say a few words about disposing of Judaica, because it sometimes comes up with my clients, like, what do I do? I've got this collection of menorahs that I've accumulated, and I don't need all these menorahs, so how do I get rid of them in a responsible way? So I did a little research on this, and Rob Tefira, you can add in if I get anything wrong here. But there, as I understand it, there are two categories. The first is Tashmishi Kedusha, which are ritual objects, defined as objects which carry holiness. They're items that contain the name of God. These are things like Torahs and accessories such as breastplates, yad, etc., as well as prayer books, siddurim, and mezuzot, things of this nature. So the way that these are disposed of, traditionally, this is done through burial, and items are placed in a special room called a geniza until such time as they're buried. The other category is Tishmini Mitzvah, which includes most other ritual objects that are essential to Jewish life. So these would be things like Kiddush cups, menorahs, Seder plates, shofars. So these are things that are able to be discarded when they're no longer fit for use, but they need to be discarded in a respectful manner. So the exception to this is talit, is kind of a hybrid. So the fringes, the tzitzit, are considered holy objects and need to be, again, dealt with that way, traditionally buried. And the shawl is the talit is considered a mitzvah object. So just some thoughts about value when you're thinking about getting rid of your stuff. And I hope that you can read this, because the writing is a little bit hard to read, but some thoughts on value. So there are different kinds of value. There's monetary value, there's sentimental value, there's the utility value of something, aesthetics value. But the reason I bring this up is because people are often disappointed when they find out how much their stuff is worth. Because if you're trying to sell your items, either consignment or auction, we are not the ones who set the value for those things. When you're trying to sell something, it's the market that sets the value. So you need to, if you're going to sell something, you have to be able to distance yourself a little bit from, what you think something is worth, and understand that it's the market that determines the value of something. So I've already talked about how to get rid of your stuff, but now I want to talk a little bit about sort of how do you let go of your stuff, right? It's different, the physical, physically getting rid of something versus kind of emotionally being able to let something go. So I've already talked about, ways that you can get rid of it, but it is hard to let go of things that have been important to us, that we've lived with. So as I said earlier, we can think about, curating our collections, actively selecting the best items to keep. We can think about giving our items a new life elsewhere where they can be used and enjoyed by others. And just a reminder that you'll still have the memories even without the things themselves. And also that you don't have to get rid of everything. But by letting go of things from the past, you create physical and psychological space for the present and the future. So letting go, as I said earlier, it's a gift to your loved ones who won't have to deal with this task later, but it's also a gift to yourself because the process of going through your things enables you to sort of revisit them and reminisce, but also letting them go enables you to have more space and clearer space. And letting go often results in feelings of relief, satisfaction, and peace of mind. I can't tell you how many people say to me after a session, I feel so much lighter. And there's such a sense of relief in that expression. So some final thoughts. Dealing with your possessions is, it's a big and important project. You've accumulated these things over your lifetime. They're important to you, so you don't want to leave it for others to deal with. And if you do nothing else after listening to this presentation, I would say the most important things: make sure loved ones can find and access important documents and information that they'll need if you're not available. Get rid of any private items that might be hurtful, embarrassing, or confusing for others to find, and document the important stories that would otherwise be lost after you're gone. And the time to start is now, right? We work on the priority projects first, continue chipping away at the others as your time frame allows. Because, just a final thought, we don't know what the future holds, but preparing for the inevitable is not only a gift to your loved ones, as I said, but it's also a gift to yourself, and you'll feel good when you do it. I mean, there's such a feeling of accomplishment knowing that you've gotten your affairs in order and that you've taken care of things. It really brings peace of mind. So with that, let's see, how do we do on time? We've got time. Thank you for listening patiently. And I'm happy to open up for questions.
Okay, so at this point, Hildy, I'll just tell you there have not been any questions put in the chat. So
Okay.
if people want to ask questions, they can do that now. And Rav Tiferet, if you could turn off